Although this Mets team needs a lot of additions to become a World Series contender, they still need to be smart with how they fill their payroll. There may be some big names out there that may look like a good fit, but the risk you take will always be the fact that you pay these players for what they did and not what they are going to do moving forward. You can't predict that, but some cases are more clear than others. Make sure to go after me a year later if I'm wrong, and I'll admit defeat. But let's open this can of lighter fluid as I give you 8 free agents the Mets should avoid this offseason.
On 3-2, Vader. Swings and misses, strike 3. He struck him out. 5 big pitchers combined for the second no-hitter in New York Mets history.
Now, I'll try to plead the best case for all of these players, but if you see a player on here that you want on this Mets team, let me know. I'm sure you will. This list comes from many different concerns. There's age, injury history, market value, maybe I just don't think it's a good fit, etc. We have 4 position players and 4 pitchers that I want the Mets to avoid this offseason. So let's get into it. Let's kick this off with Adam Duvall. Now, when I mention Adam Duvall, you probably think of a prolific power hitter who can anchor the bottom half of your batting order. But I personally have never understood the fascination with Duvall. And that's because of the lack of value that you're guaranteed to get from him throughout his entire career. Duvall can be a very frustrating hitter. He strikes out more than anyone in baseball, his plate discipline is terrible, and his bat-to-ball skills resemble Joey Gallo. Now, those whiff-or-barrel hitters can strengthen a lineup's protection, but they also can be some of the worst situational hitters ever. And that is the case for Duvall, as his leverage splits from the past few years are either underwhelming or at replacement level. The truth is, he was a prolific power hitter 5 years ago. Ever since then, he's been riddled with injuries, including a very serious Achilles injury in 2020 and a season-ending wrist injury in 2022. This is extremely important because Duvall is a massive dead pull hitter, and one of the most important things a pull hitter needs is his wrist. With how much he's slowed down since 2017, there's no safe bet that he will contribute to a power-hungry team like the Mets. And coming into an age 34 season, it's only going to get worse. If the Mets are looking to replace Nimmo if he lands elsewhere, a perennial sub-2 win player who is never healthy is not the area to look in. Second position player on this list, or shall I say bat, JD Martinez. Martinez may have been the ideal addition at the trade deadline. I was never completely on board, but I understand how he does fit into the Mets lineup. His combination of situational bat-to-ball skills and coveted balanced power is a plus and has been a massive plus for a long time. Although he's continued to produce consistent full seasons, it's extremely hard to believe that he will continue to do so on the tough side of 30. He's dodged quite a few bullets with more than a dozen IL stints in the past 4 years, as he's slowly declined in production since his 2018 MVP caliber season. But it is fairly possible that maybe Martinez has a few good years left, but I personally don't believe it's worth the projected cost. An average market value of $16 million is a massive risk for a glorified DH who's always struggled defensively and has only gotten worse as he's aged. You're just putting yourself in a massive lack of flexibility hole. As for current members of this team, Daniel Vogelbach and Mark Vientos are both strong suit designated hitters who most likely are guaranteed to be on the opening day bench. This is why versatile power protection is the way to go. JD Martinez is a proven hitter who has solidified himself as one of the best of this generation. But for the multi-year deal I'm expecting him to get in free agency, his productive fall-off and physical decline is something I don't want the Mets to commit to. The third position player on this list is Jose Abreu. Although going into an age 36 season is a net negative nonetheless, that wouldn't be the biggest problem if you add Abreu to this Mets lineup. He actually fits perfectly with the Mets hitting identity. Doesn't strike out a lot and puts the ball in play. The only issue is that Abreu would most likely blend into the lineup than actually make it better. Although he could provide power protection behind Alonso, his power has definitely hit a steep drop since his 60-game MVP win, and that exposes a problem the Mets have had all season. Abreu hits a lot of ground balls, and although it comes from selective hitting, there's no guarantee this sustains next season and on. With the MLB banning the shift in 2023, Abreu's hitting approach could be damaged with how much he's relied on it throughout his career. It's a very noticeable difference. You also run into the same problem for value as JD Martinez. No defensive value or flexibility. Even though he plays a position, he doesn't play it well, and he isn't guaranteed to get better as he ages. Final position player on this list, Justin Turner. There's been some rumors this offseason that Justin Turner is reportedly interested in a Mets reunion. Yeah, no thank you. Although our search for a franchise third baseman has gone to desperate measures in the past few years, the book on Turner is closed and needs to stay closed. Yes, Turner blossomed into an all-star caliber infielder once he left the Mets, but at age 37 and coming off of multiple lower body injuries, more of a replacement rather than an upgrade. Adding Turner to the third base depth chart of Escobar, Beatty, and Guillorme just doesn't really make as much sense when the Mets are missing so much more flexibility around the rest of the roster. It's possible that Justin Turner could take a one-year deal at this stage of his career, but the keys belong to Brett Beatty on opening day as far as I'm concerned. This Mets roster is not relatively young, and our shortage of young talent needs MLB reps. This also plays to a pet peeve of mine. When you've had the stagnant success the Mets have had, don't go recycling old pieces. Although this is a completely different team compared to when Turner was a Met, refurbishing the downward trend of a good career isn't worth it. Turner's era of shaving cream celebrations are over, and they've been over for a decade. It's just not a good fit. Now let's get to the pitchers and start with Justin Verlander. Hold the pitchforks. Let me explain. Yes, Justin Verlander just won the Cy Young and came off the best year of his career at age 39. It is also true that Justin Verlander is one of the best pitchers of this generation. But as this situation looks with the Mets, it will be a massive risk to bring in Justin Verlander, who is coming onto a 40-year-old season and reportedly seeking a similar contract to Max Scherzer. Now, Verlander is great, and he 100% deserves a Max Scherzer type of deal. But to double that on payroll to just two pitchers who are both above the age of 38 with recent injury history is definitely not the best way to retool this rotation. Although you can make the same argument with Jacob deGrom, the chance of this organization's goal of sustained success has a much better possibility signing him. If you look at the Mets starting rotations over the past few years, the overwhelming timeline of moving parts is extremely noticeable. Adding Verlander to that mix continues the cycle of facing the same problem but at the top of the rotation and perhaps the bottom. Verlander is 40 years old, and the chances of him being in the Mets rotation for more than a year are slim to none. Now, of course, deGrom has been injured recently, but this is the risk that you take with every pitcher in this league, and I'm willing to take that risk with a 35-year-old rather than a 40-year-old. Not to mention the fact that Verlander has been just as injury-prone as Jake in the past few years. We've also been given notice from Jacob deGrom's doctor of how the risk is pretty much the same for every single pitcher. And the fact that Verlander pitched more innings than Jake this year, it kind of hurts his case more than helps it in terms of arm mileage. I've mentioned that I want the Mets to aim younger with the back end of the rotation, and making it even older at the top is hard for sustainable success. I also am questioning how long Verlander will be able to hold up. Even though his return from injury was impressive, it's hard to see it as dominance or expect dominance going forward. As for his ability, Verlander has become very prone to the home run ball recently, and he tends to surrender a lot of hard contact. I wouldn't cry batted ball luck because he does get a lot of strikeouts, but the point still stands. If you pay Verlander, you're gonna pay him to be an ace. And even though I don't think he'll regress as hard, I wouldn't expect him to live up to a Max Scherzer deal at age 40. Now let's get to Kenley Jansen. This is a match I do not see happening, but it's a name I want to put out there with the amount of free spaces the Mets have in their bullpen going into free agency. Now, Jansen has had a successful career, and after another productive season, I'd expect him to get a multi-year deal. Even though the Mets should look for a backup closer when Diaz comes to face in the heart of the order or comes into the 8th inning, Jansen is either going to be too expensive or he may start to hit a wall, which he's already shown to do that recently. Jansen is coming off a 36-year-old season, and similar to Adam Ottavino, he can be extremely frustrating to watch. The difference is that Jansen has a massive fly ball problem, and even though he's been able to suppress hard contact throughout his career, it's really started to unravel these last 2 seasons. His cutter isn't as sharp anymore, he's started to lose command of his sinker, his walk rates in high leverage situations are a massive issue. I personally think that Jansen may have been a good move back in 2017, but the prime of his career is most likely long gone. Just another example of what the Mets need to do. aim younger. And that brings us to Michael Fulmer. If there is one name that Mets fans have not shut up about in the last few years, it's Michael Fulmer. And I seriously do not understand the fascination. Back in 2015, Fulmer was the key piece the Mets sent to Detroit for Yoenis Cespedes to lead us to the World Series. Aside from his Rookie of the Year campaign in 2016, which he didn't deserve, he's been quite the mediocre pitcher even before being converted to a reliever to stay healthy. He struggles to get strikeouts, his command has regressed a lot since he got Tommy John surgery, and he has an extremely vulnerable pitch mix. I really don't like glossing over grades, but I don't think there's another way you can explain how overexposed he can be. He doesn't have a high-profile set to be a reliever, and he doesn't seem to have the health to be a starter anymore. This is one of the Mets' nostalgia reunions that just does not deserve a visit. He may have shown promise in his rookie year, but it's hard to call him even average ever since. And with a market value of $8 million, I will gladly pass on that massive overpay for a mediocre reliever. He may look like somewhat quality on the outside, but Michael Fulmer is 100% not the answer. And finally, you knew this one was coming, Brad Hand. No, this is not because of his mom trying to roast me on Twitter. What it's really about is the Mets' current reliever situation. Everyone has a wish list for this team, and free agent lefty Andrew Chafin is definitely one of my top favorites for this team to sign. The problem is what the Mets created themselves. After Edwin Diaz and Robert Suarez got paid, the reliever market has been established to be an overpay this season, and that would most likely force the Mets to give Chafin a possible $10 million to maybe even $12 million a year for multiple years. It's possible that that turns the Mets away from Chafin and could focus on the more cheaper lefty options, and one of those would be Brad Hand. What's wrong with Brad Hand? Well, how much time you got? Brad Hand had a horrendous 2021, which led him to be DFA'd by the Nationals and Blue Jays, and he eventually finished his season with the Mets. He then followed that with a traditional bounce-back season, posting a 2.80 earned run average in 45 innings pitched. Even though for the first time in his career he relatively avoided hard contact, it's extremely hard to think that this was on purpose. Here's how I know. Hand has always had some of the worst command in baseball. His inability to hit intended spots is what has made him a terrible high-leverage reliever for so long. Not to mention his pure control of the zone has recently regressed with a career-high walk rate over the past 2 seasons. As a soft-tossing sinker-slider lefty, Hand's main specialty is designed to induce ground balls, and he hasn't been able to do that for quite some time, which by that means if he were to fix his walk problem from 2022, the hard contact will catch up to him. He's just not the lockdown reliever he's always been labeled as. Pursuing Brad Hand as a back-end lefty after the season he had will most likely blow up in your face. He's a very vulnerable pitcher who just buckles under pressure. He may look good on the outside, but when it matters, he has no value coming out of the bullpen in high leverage. Just another Mets reunion that just does not have to happen. Now, in conclusion, no disrespect to any of these players. I'm sure wherever they go, they are going to get paid, and whether some deserve it more than others, their free agent market is definitely going to be something to watch. Now, I'll definitely be disappointed if any of these 8 guys are in Mets uniforms by opening day, but the main point being made here is that the Mets need to be careful on how they spend Steve Cohen's money.